People use the word boundaries a lot in relationships and communication. This idea of setting boundaries, setting healthy boundaries. What does that actually mean? For me, a boundary is the edge between yes, I'm willing to do something and no, I'm not. The point where my yes flips into a no is my boundary. So the boundary is something I check internally with myself in relation to whatever's going on, whatever the situation is, and make a decision about what I'm willing to do and what I'm not. So for example, if my child, which happened last night, drops her fork, throws her fork, and then says, "Get my fork," to me in a tone like that, "My fork," then last night, that was my boundary. I said, no, I'm not willing to get you your fork, because in that moment, I didn't enjoy being spoken to right then, like that. I was tired. I didn't want to get it. But the boundary, so it's an internal decision I made. It's not about her behavior. It's connected to her behavior. But at the end of the day, it's checking where I'm at in that moment. Because as happens, the other day, same thing would happen. She'd get my fork, and I realized that I actually am willing to get her fork. So my boundary isn't there. My boundary might be with, I don't know, if she screamed at me, but the reason my boundary had shifted in that other moment is because I was able to see that, gee, she's just super tired. She's had a big day. She just really needs some support right now. And that's the best she's able to do in terms of her communication. Adults are also like that. And I had a bit more compassion, and therefore I was able to and willing to get her the fork. So the boundary is not something which is dictated by the external. It's an internal process that I go on in any given moment in relation to what someone is asking or telling me to do, checking whether I'm willing, checking my willingness. That is a boundary. And another point is that, so point number one is the boundary is an internal checking of where my edge is in terms of what I'm willing and not willing to do. And the second aspect is that a boundary is not something we place on other people. This is really deep in our society and the way we live as human beings today, is like this idea that, I have to put a boundary on them or stop them from doing that or restrict them in some way. That's not acceptable. We often say that's not acceptable. Well, what we need to really be clear on here is that a boundary about what is acceptable and not acceptable is not something I'm putting on you and saying you cannot do that, stop doing that. It's something that I put on myself. So for example, if my partner is speaking at me in a very accusatory tone or degrading way, and they're becoming more and more aggressive, my boundary is not to say, you've crossed the boundary, I'm not willing to accept that anymore. The boundary there is like, I am not willing to be in this conversation anymore. I am not willing to be in this conversation anymore. I'll remove myself from this conversation. And to me, it might be subtle. I don't know if that sounds subtle to you or not, but it might be subtle because the result is very similar in the sense of like, okay, the conversation ends or shifts, I remove myself from it or they stop talking. But internally, the energy that I feel when I take responsibility for my boundary and decide, no, I will not accept this anymore from the point of view of, no, I will not stay in this conversation anymore. I feel a sense of empowerment. I feel a sense of ownership. I feel I'm taking responsibility for my own needs and well-being, as opposed to when I say, you have crossed the boundary, stop. When I do that, I am filled with a type of aggression in me, a type of tension in me, because I've ventured into that territory of restricting you and telling you what you should or shouldn't be doing right now. That's not for me to say. I do not know the million things that are going on in you right now that are causing you to become increasingly aggressive towards me. All of the things that have led into this moment. I don't know. I can't know that you should or shouldn't be talking to me right now like this. It's not for me. I've ventured into the territory which I don't want to go into. That's for you to decide. It's for you to decide right now whether, actually, I'm doing more damage right now to the relationship than good, and I'm going to stop. That's yours. I wish you'd be able to make that decision right now and stop talking to me like that, but ultimately, that's for you. I take ownership over myself right now and will remove myself from the conversation. And by virtue of doing that, I'm also taking responsibility over the relationship by stopping this conversation. So boundaries are for me and for ourselves and not for other people. And they're an internal check that we do about our willingness. So that's my take on boundaries. I'll say one last thing, that there is an exception of when I will put a boundary on someone else. It usually comes out in relation to children, but it's when your behavior or the other person's behavior is risking someone's safety. In that instance, I will physically stop the other person from taking those actions which are endangering life. And this is kind of a very key principle of nonviolent communication, that when it comes to protection of life, then we stop other people from taking actions which are currently endangering life. So if a kid is hitting another kid or pulling their hair, then of course I'm going to go in and stop that, put a boundary over that child's behavior in that moment for the sake of protecting the other child's well-being and also their well-being ultimately. Thoughts? Anything resonate? Love to hear. I love being challenged. It helps me find my own clarity. I just love hearing how this content meets you.